Looking to make your gift to Michigan Public go further? Right now, through the Resilience for the Future match, all new monthly gifts will be doubled. You can support public media now at michiganpublic.org/donate.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
It's never been more important to elect Democratic governors.
Over the weekend, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was elected vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association.
Democratic governors are delivering every day for their states.
A role that puts her right in the middle of the party's national strategy setting heading into the high-stakes 2026 midterm elections.
We have 36 governors' races next year, and we're not taking our eye off the ball for even a second.
And it comes at a moment when Whitmer is sending maybe some mixed or just very carefully calibrated signals about what comes next for her.
Over the past few months, we've seen this flurry of national reporting that paints a complicated picture. Whitmer, the Democrat Donald Trump apparently likes working with. Whitmer, the governor who's been quietly pulling back from national attention. Whitmer, the potential 2028 presidential contender who may or may not actually want that job. So let's turn to two folks who have spent many years covering this governor. Nancy Kaffer, Detroit Free Press editorial page editor, and Zach Stanton, deputy managing editor of news at MS Now, formerly of Politico. Hey, you two.
Hey, thanks for having us, Zoe.
There are not two better people that I would like to talk to today.
You poor thing.
Let's start with this unanimous selection of Whitmer to be the next vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association. Zach, explain what kind of actual influence this gives Whitmer, and how should we understand it as part of her political trajectory?
Well, that's a bit of a complicated question, because typically the vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association will ascend to become chair after they serve for a year. But she doesn't have that option, because when she serves for a year as vice chair, it coincides with her ending her tenure as governor. So she can't serve as chair. But as vice chair, she'll basically fundraise, advise candidates, Democratic candidates for governor nationwide, and support efforts to elect them. And on one side, you could see that as a way to give her sort of a national platform without running for national office. It enables her to continue to develop a national fundraising network if she did want to run for president. And on the other hand, it's not the most glamorous role. It's a very workhorse role. It is involved in the nitty-gritty in some ways. It's not a particularly glamorous position. That said, being in leadership at DGA, as it is called, DGA typically leads to having some sort of national role if you're a governor. A lot of people who later served in the cabinet or are exploring or have explored presidential runs of their own served as either vice chair or chair of DGA. Andy Beshear, who was named chairman this past weekend, he's the governor of Kentucky, a Democrat, widely expected to be running himself for president in 2028. So it remains to be seen what exactly this means vis-a-vis Whitmer. But I think what it means vis-a-vis Democratic gubernatorial candidates is that they can expect Gretchen Whitmer to, make the rounds and campaign on their behalf.
Nancy, do you think that this new DGA position is more about a national leadership role, as Zach mentioned, or is it about maintaining relevance, making these connections for after she's term limited out in 2026? And does it have to be one or the other?
I think maybe it's about that she's really good at fundraising and at winning gubernatorial elections. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? But of course, it's not just a cigar. There's, of course, a lot more tea leaves to read here. But she is an excellent fundraiser. And she has, has she won everything she's ever run for?
She's won every time.
Yeah. So she's good at this. She's been extremely good at charting a political course through purple Michigan and getting folks to come along with her. She is personally very progressive, or has historically been personally progressive, but has focused on these dinner table issues like fixing the damn roads or supporting schools or things where people can find common ground. She has a hugely, rapidly loyal social media following. I mean, if you're looking for someone who can help guide Democrats through a very challenging election year, and she has a prodigious fundraiser, I don't think you can come up with a better option.
So, Zach, we have been alluding to the real ultimate question that I think is why we're having you here, right? And what many folks across Michigan and the nation have, which is Governor Gretchen Whitmer interested in running for president?
That is, in many ways, the million-dollar question or multi-million-dollar question. I think what Gretchen Whitmer has done is sort of maintain strategic ambiguity here. She's keeping her options sort of genuinely open. In 2024, of course, when Joe Biden was sort of forced off the ticket, she definitively took herself out of consideration. She's being much more ambiguous this time. Her somewhat low-key approach to her own national profile at this moment in time really differs from what you've seen from Democratic governors like Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker. Both of them have been really content to frame themselves as leaders of the resistance to Donald Trump. She's taken a very different approach. And I think in part that's because she thinks that this is how she can be most effective as governor in a state that Trump won twice and that she won twice. But I also think it speaks to a genuine sort of ambivalence on her part about whether she wants the job. Typically, folks that run for president, if I can put them on the couch for the moment, many of them have some sort of deep psychological need to run for president or be president. This is true of certainly Bill Clinton. This was true of Donald Trump. I have never got the sense that it's true for Gretchen Whitmer. She seems genuinely comfortable with who she is and doesn't seem to need to run for office. And I think that makes her kind of a wild card because there isn't a sense that she's like desperately clawing for this. I think that if she does end up running, it's going to be a situation where she is convinced that she has to run. I don't see her as someone who is actively seeking it out, but I also know that there's a huge advantage to keeping her name out there. I've spoken with people who've gone on international trade missions with her, leaders in Michigan, who shall remain nameless, who told me that, they went overseas with her, and even there, they had heard of the rumors of her running for president. And in fact, it landed her better meetings and economic development meetings than she might have otherwise got. So there's no upside to saying, no, I'm not interested in being president. But there is a huge upside to saying, maybe, or at least keeping quiet about it.
Well, but she hasn't said maybe. Anytime you ask her if she's running for president, she says no. I mean, she said it to me. I wrote a piece about her when her book came out last year. I said, so are you going to run in 2028? And she said, no. And I said, no, really? And she said, no plans. That's not a thing. And anytime people have asked her, she says, I like my job. I'm not doing anything else. I mean, she has consistent. The Econ Club earlier this year, they said, what are you going to do when you're term limited next year? And she fired back instantly, retire. The only thing she has done to stoke people's belief that she is running for president is continue to exist. Like, she has never said she wants to be president. And also the other thing is she can say she doesn't want to be president a million times and people will assume she's being coy. I think she is a little cagey about it because, as Zach noted, she's a little too smart to fully close that door. But also, again, she could stand in the middle of campus marches and just have it skywritten, I don't want to be president. And people would still think, oh, she's really playing it close to the vest. But there is the leverage and cachet and being considered a contender. But I also agree with Zach's assessment that she does have a strong sense of duty and obligation. I think if there were no other viable candidate, and she perceived that she was convinced to do it, then I think she has a strong patriotism, and I think she has a strong sense of responsibility, and I think could be convinced.
I agree with everything Nancy said there. And I think that the sort of, the thing that a lot of people in Washington, D.C. sort of puzzle over is like, why take the vice chairmanship or chairwomanship of the DGA? Why launch a federal PAC if you plan to basically retire to a lake house? And I think whether or not she has said this, that she doesn't feel like she needs to be the main character in 2026, but she would like to have a hand in crafting the story. So she, at the very least, wants to stay in the conversation in some sense.
Well, it does seem, like I said, that she does have a sense of responsibility. And, I think she thinks that it's better to have more Democratic governors and sees herself as having a role to play in that process.
And, like you said, Nancy, that would be consistent with Gretchen Whitmer to just want to be a relevant part of the conversation. But the other thing, as fans of the original Mary Poppins movie might remember, it's kind of a pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken, that she can say right now that she doesn't want to run for president, but if she decides to take it on at some point, it's not like this is really going to be a big barrier to that.
No, sure. I mean, I think it's very clear that she would be a very attractive candidate. She's got a great track record of winning in a purple state. She's a great fundraiser, as I've already discussed. She's navigated a lot of the challenges of the Trump second presidency in a way that have infuriated some members of the Democratic base, but it has not escaped my notice that Trump has not even twitched towards sending the National Guard into Detroit, which fits the profile of all the other cities that he's targeted. We have not seen some of the dramatic, violent ICE enforcement actions here. I mean, we are having some of those things are happening, deportation and stepped-up deportations. We're not immune from those, but we aren't seeing senior citizens being body slammed on sidewalks like I think there was a report out of Chicago a few weeks ago. So, I mean, she is, again, navigating these currents in a way that may not be what the base wants to hear, but is what a lot of people who are going to be the swing voters who decide elections may be more appealing to them.
That is Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press, and Zach Stanton is here of MS Now. We are talking about Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who may be term limited, but is nowhere close to leaving the political conversation. Let's turn to the other story that has followed this governor, which you just alluded to, Nancy, and that is her relationship and how she works with President Trump. We know there right now are seemingly two Democratic camps. There are the J.B. Pritzkers, the Gavin Newsoms, who are actively, publicly fighting the president. Whitmer, though, has taken this different approach. Some political pundits say that in itself is a political move, an appeal perhaps to future independent voters. Politico's headline last week about Whitmer, "This 2028 possibility is Trump's favorite Democrat." What do you make of the politics, Zach Stanton, surrounding Whitmer's relationship with Donald Trump?
I think the best way to think about how she's worked with Donald Trump is that she's approached him like a foreign head of state. Someone like a Mark Carney in Canada, or even before him, a Trudeau in Canada, or a prime minister in the UK, where they realize that this is someone that they just have to work with in some respect. And so there is not much to be had on a practical level from just stoking tensions with Trump. So is there a risk of that hurting her if she decides to run in 2028? Yeah, the Democratic base is furious at Donald Trump, and potential other candidates like Gavin Newsom are defining themselves through resistance. But, she has opted to take a different approach, mindful of the fact that, again, Trump has won Michigan 2 of the last 3 presidential elections. And he's won in places that she has won, places like Macomb County, to bring all things back to where I'm from.
As we know you love to do.
Yes, I do. But, I think that she realizes that there is just a reality that she has to deal with Donald Trump, and that she can ultimately, to use the cliche, catch more flies with honey than she does with vinegar. And to Nancy's point, you haven't seen the National Guard go into places like Detroit, and you have seen Trump do things like bring a new fighter jet squadron to Selfridge, which is in Macomb County again.
All roads lead to Macomb.
At least 696 and 94 do. But there are, I think, real practical reasons to continue this relationship. And it's in some ways a relationship that's too big to fail from her perspective.
Nancy, and we hear this phrase come up periodically in different election cycles. Do we have a new Democrat lane right now, someone who's taking a unique approach? And is that Gretchen Whitmer?
I don't know if it's a new lane, but I think, the election isn't going to be decided by states like California or Illinois. Those states are going to go blue. And because we have the Electoral College, it doesn't matter if half of the base decides to sit home. Well, I mean, it probably would matter if half the base decided to sit home. But it doesn't matter if some disgruntled Democrats sit it out because they think that Whitmer has been too chubby with Donald Trump in a hypothetical hypothetical where she was the candidate, the election is going to be decided in places like Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, where the demographics are very similar to Michigan, and that there are these purple state voters that are going to not want a Gavin Newsom. So is it a new lane? Maybe, but I think also maybe it's a return to kind of an old lane where the idea that people should win elected office by campaigning on issues that have salience with the majority of voters, like that didn't used to be controversial, and now it kind of is. So is it a new lane? Is it kind of a return to an old lane? The question is whether or not she's actually interested in this. I think there's no question that if she were, she would be an extremely viable candidate because of all of this, and not despite, but because of all of these things.
Allow me to bring things back to Macomb County again. Bill Clinton, the reason for his ascendance in no small part is because of the New Democrat branding, the idea that he was a break from what the party had become. And the reason that that came about was because his pollster was Stanley Greenberg, who was a pollster that was put on the map because he identified the Reagan Democrats. And he did that with focus groups in Macomb County. In Warren, where he talked to disaffected Democrats who basically thought that the party had ceased to represent working class white people like them in favor of representing the poor and the very powerful. There are racial elements to that for sure, but there is a huge class element to that. And the idea was that the party's brand had become toxic to broad swaths of a middle America. And that was partly why Reagan won, that these people who traditionally were ancestrally Democrat voted for Ronald Reagan. And Bill Clinton mounted, a campaign to appeal to a great many of them. And I think depending on how you view the 2024 election and the current woes that the Democratic Party has with its own brand nationally, you see something very similar, where there is this idea that the party perhaps has veered too far to the left, that it's become too much concerned with people at the margins as opposed to people that represent the middle American ideal. And if that is, in fact, the theory of the case, then you could have someone like Gretchen Whitmer step into that role and be someone who represents a new type of Democratic Party in the way of a Bill Clinton or a Gary Hart.
Zach, I want to end with you and take it back full circle to Whitmer as vice chair of the DGA, of Whitmer gearing up in her final year in office as governor. We know she will be traveling across the country, helping other Democrats who are on the ballot in 2026. What will you be watching for as we try to read signs about what her future looks like?
That's a tricky question because I think with Gretchen Whitmer, she is such a Rorschach test where you can project on her whatever you want. So you could, on the one hand, see her campaigning in places like Iowa, where there's going to be a competitive gubernatorial race. And
yes,
you could
so
say,
true.
Oh, she's clearly gearing up for a presidential run. On the other hand, she could just be performing her role as vice chair of DGA. And the strategic ambiguity is where she lives. But you look at Gretchen Whitmer and you kind of see what you want, which is a huge upside, a huge asset if you're a politician, but can also lead to people having a lot of outsized expectations for you. And they'll project on you whatever they think they want to see, which again has upsides, but can also mean a lot of disappointed fans.
That is Zach Stanton, Deputy Managing Editor of News at MS Now, and Nancy Kaffer. She is Editorial Page Editor at the Detroit Free Press. The first of what will be many continuing conversations about Governor Gretchen Whitmer's political future. Thanks so much, you two.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks, guys.
And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.